June 2nd, 2017, 9:14 a.m., Collier County, Florida. At a small wildlife check station, officers logged an entry in a state predator removal program. On the table lay one of the largest animals they had brought in that year. It had been pulled from a canal on the edge of Big Cypress National Preserve. They expected to measure it, photograph it, and note whatever was inside. Instead, what they were about to cut open would pull a closed missing persons file back into the light. On June 11th, 2016, single mother Lauren Fisher and her 19-year-old son Evan vanished in that same stretch of land. What happened to them? And why had this area stayed off limits for so long? For most people driving between Miami and Naples, Big Cypress is just trees, water, and sky beyond the guardrail. For Lauren, 36, it was supposed to be one quiet day away from fluorescent lights and hospital alarms. She worked nights in Fort Myers, covered extra shifts when co-workers called out, and tried to keep her bills current. Evan was technically an adult now, enrolled at a community college, taking classes irregularly, still living in her small apartment. He had finally agreed to spend a Saturday walking the easy boardwalk loops with her. They would meet Lauren's mother, Marion, back at the main parking lot before dark. Marion dropped them at the visitor center a little after 10 a.m. that morning. The rules were simple. Stay on the marked paths. Be back by 7:30 p.m. Call if anything changed. By 8:05 p.m., the sky over the preserve had shifted from gray to almost black. Day visitors were gone. Only a handful of vehicles remained near the closed visitor center. Marion sat in her aging silver sedan with the windows cracked. Lauren's contact pulled up on her phone. She called again. Voicemail again. No text from Evan. No headlights turning into the lot. At 8:27 p.m., she stepped out, locked the car, and walked toward the darkened ranger station. She tried to push down the sense that something had gone very wrong. How could two adults disappear from a crowded trail system without leaving a single visible sign behind? By the summer of 2016, people who knew Lauren Fisher could list her routines almost by heart. She was 36, a licensed practical nurse at a rehabilitation facility in Fort Myers, working mostly nights because the pay was slightly better. She lived in a modest two-bedroom apartment off Colonial Boulevard, drove a 12-year-old sedan, and kept every receipt in a labeled envelope. She had grown up in Southwest Florida, graduated from a local high school, and never moved far from her mother, Marion. There was nothing in her background that suggested risk-taking or impulsive decisions. Lauren had been widowed for just over a year. Her husband, Daniel, a maintenance technician, died in a workplace accident in early 2015. The insurance payout helped cover funeral costs and some debts, but it was not enough to stabilize her finances. Since then, she covered rent, utilities, and an old car loan on a single income. Co-workers said she almost never called in sick. She traded shifts, stayed late, and picked up holiday slots because the differentials mattered on her paycheck. Her relationship with her son, Evan, was complicated but close. He was 19, technically an adult, enrolled at a community college in Fort Myers, but taking fewer classes than planned. He worked part-time at a grocery store in Cape Coral, often on inconsistent hours. Lauren pressed him to stay in school. Evan pushed back, saying he needed money now, not later. Neighbors heard raised voices at times, but they also saw the two of them carrying groceries together or leaving for late-night drives to pick up fast food between her shifts. Marion, now retired from her job as a school secretary, was the third fixed point in their triangle. She lived 15 minutes away and often covered early morning check-ins when Lauren came home exhausted. She kept a key to the apartment, wrote reminders on sticky notes, and drove Lauren to appointments if the car needed work. Friends of the family said Marion was the one who worried out loud. Lauren worried on paper, in lists and schedules. The week before the trip to Big Cypress, Lauren's life looked busy but stable on the surface. Bank records showed regular small payments, no sudden withdrawals, no hidden accounts. Her phone log showed predictable calls to Marion, to Evan, to a small circle of co-workers. If you are interested in how ordinary lives turn into cold files and then reopen years later, consider subscribing so you can follow this case to the end. On paper, Lauren's world was controlled and documented, which made one recent change in her plan stand out sharply once investigators saw it. On Saturday, June 11, 2016, The day began in a way everyone in the family later described as completely ordinary. At 9:20 a.m., Marion pulled into Lauren's apartment complex in Fort Myers. Security camera footage from the lot shows Lauren locking the front door. Another angle shows Evan carrying a small day pack and joining her on the walkway. A third clip captures all three of them walking to Marion's car. The timestamps are clear. There is no sign of anyone following them. They reached the Big Cypress Visitor Center parking lot shortly after 10:05 a.m. Investigators confirmed that arrival time using toll records and a traffic camera hit on I-75. Inside the gift shop, receipts show Lauren buying 2 bottles of water and a printed park map at 10:18 a.m. A ranger later recalled her asking which boardwalk loop was the easiest because she had worked a night shift. Evan bought a cheap pair of sunglasses from a different cashier a few minutes later. Video from inside the building confirms both transactions. Marion stayed only a short time. Cell records show a brief outgoing call from her phone to Lauren's at 10:27 a.m. It lasted 19 seconds. Investigators believe it was the final reminder about the pickup time. The plan was simple. Lauren and Evan would walk the short loops near the visitor center. They might take photos and sit at an overlook. Then they would meet Marion back at the main lot at 7:30 p.m. Until early evening, nothing obvious appears out of place. Later interviews with visitors produced several vague sightings of a woman in a pale t-shirt on the raised walkway sometime after lunch. A few people also mentioned a taller young man walking beside her. None of those witnesses could say with certainty that it was Lauren and Evan. At 2:12 p.m., Lauren's phone sent a text to a coworker about switching a future shift. That message went through normally. That was the last confirmed activity from her device. At 7:35 p.m., Marion pulled into the lot again. The visitor center was closed, but several vehicles remained. Lauren and Evan were not there. By 8:20 p.m., Marion had called both numbers 5 times each and walked the length of the lot twice. When she stepped into the ranger office at 8:27 p.m., she still believed they might appear at any moment. When Marion walked into the ranger office at 8:27 p.m., staff treated it as what it was on paper, an overdue hiker report. The duty ranger on that Saturday night took her statement, asked for physical descriptions, and noted the plan to stay on the short boardwalk loops. At 8:49 p.m., Collier County deputies were notified by radio that a mother and adult son had not returned from a day hike. By 9:15 p.m., 2 patrol units were in the lot, checking vehicles and confirming that Lauren's car was not on site. Shortly after 10 p.m., the response escalated. The National Park Service authorized a hasty search of the closest boardwalk and connector paths. Rangers and deputies walked the routes with flashlights, calling Lauren's and Evan's names, checking benches and small viewing platforms. 9 units arrived just after midnight. Handlers attempted to start tracks from the visitor center entrance and from the gift shop doors where video had last captured them. The dogs showed interest in the main boardwalk, but quickly became overwhelmed by layers of human scent from a busy weekend. At 6:10 a.m. on June 12th, an incident command post was set up near the parking lot. Florida Fish and Wildlife officers joined the effort, bringing airboats and a helicopter with thermal imaging. Search teams worked in grids, concentrating first on the signed trails and the immediate surrounding wetlands. They found dropped water bottles, snack wrappers, and a ball cap that belonged to another visitor who was quickly identified. They found no trace of Lauren or Evan. On June 13th, the search plan expanded. Supervisors drew a wider perimeter, including a rough service road that ran parallel to a canal west of the visitor area. That afternoon, a new voice appeared at the briefing table. Detective Jason Mallory from the Collier County Sheriff's Office was assigned as law enforcement liaison. At 3:42 p.m., according to the written log, Mallory relayed a report of a pesticide incident from a private agricultural contractor operating on land bordering the preserve. The claim was specific. A piece of spraying equipment had malfunctioned the previous night, sending a restricted-use chemical drifting over the fence line toward the service road. Within hours, that road and the surrounding area were labeled a temporary exclusion zone for ground teams. Supervisors were told that exposure without protective gear could be dangerous. Aerial searches could continue overhead, but no one on foot or with dogs was allowed into that stretch until environmental specialists cleared it. Several rangers argued that time was critical and that the area lay directly along the most likely line of travel if Lauren and Evan had tried to cut back toward the highway. They were overruled. By June 24th, after nearly 2 weeks, the active search was scaled back. Officially, the working theory shifted toward environmental exposure or wildlife in deeper parts of the preserve. Unofficially, Marion kept pointing to a simple map, circling the blocked-off road again and again. Years later, investigators would pull that same map from the file and ask why the most obvious corridor had been sealed off at precisely the wrong moment. On June 2, 2017, almost a year after Lauren and Evan disappeared, the Big Cypress check station logged a routine predator removal. 2 licensed hunters brought in a large invasive snake they had shot along a canal near a gated service road west of the visitor area. The animal measured over 16 feet. Its body was thick, with a single heavy bulge in the middle. Staff prepared for the usual photographs and measurements. What they found instead forced the sheriff's office to reopen a file that was already drifting toward storage. The necropsy began under bright fluorescent lights. A wildlife biologist made a careful incision along the lower body. When the stomach was opened, the team did not see deer hair or wild hog tissue. They saw human skin and fabric in an advanced state of breakdown. Work stopped. A supervisor secured the area and called the medical examiner and the Collier County Sheriff's Office. Crime scene photos were taken. The partial remains were removed and placed in sealed containers for transport. No one on site tried to guess who the victim might be. At the medical examiner's office in Naples, forensic staff cataloged what had been recovered. There was enough bone and soft tissue to obtain a DNA sample. There was also a fragment of clothing that had once been light-colored, with a faint printed design. Investigators compared it to descriptions Marion had given of what Lauren wore the day she vanished. It sounded close, but not definitive. The real answer came from the lab. The DNA profile was entered into state and national databases that track unidentified remains and missing persons. Within days, there was a hit. The sample matched the reference swab Marion had given in 2016, when Lauren and Evan were first reported missing. The sheriff's office notified her in person. On paper, the discovery allowed authorities to change Lauren's status from missing to deceased. At first, investigators leaned toward a natural explanation. They considered heat, exhaustion, a fall, then scavenging by wildlife, and, finally, consumption by the snake. On a map, though, the capture site created a problem. The snake had been taken less than a mile from the same service road that had been labeled too dangerous to search. The question now was not only how Lauren died, but how her body ended up there a year later. At first, the medical examiner's office in Naples treated the case as an unusual version of a familiar problem. People get lost in South Florida's interior. Heat, water, and wildlife do the rest. The question was whether the remains from the snake fit that pattern or not. To answer it, the office brought in a forensic anthropologist, Dr. Aaron Thorne, who had worked on badly decomposed cases from wetlands before. His task was simple on paper: estimate how long Lauren had been dead, and look for anything that did not match an accidental death. He began with the bones. Portions of the pelvis, ribs, and one upper leg bone were present. There were no clear signs of crushing that would suggest a large constricting animal killed her. There were also no classic high-speed impact fractures that would scream car crash. What drew his attention instead were the cut surfaces. In several locations, the ends of bones were not jagged. Under magnification, they showed relatively straight margins with fine scoring marks. That pattern pointed toward a sharp tool, not tearing by alligators or other scavengers. The soft tissue raised another issue. Everyone involved knew the rough timeline. Lauren and Evan disappeared in June 2016. The snake was killed in June 2017. A body left in Big Cypress that long, in heat and water, should have followed a predictable path of breakdown. Dr. Thorne requested thin sections of muscle and connective tissue for microscopic examination. Under the microscope, he saw damage that did not match normal swamp decomposition. Cell walls were ruptured in a way he associated with freezing and thawing. He ordered additional samples from different areas. The pattern held across them. The best explanation, in his report, was that Lauren's body had been kept at very low temperatures for an extended period. That meant a freezer, not a pond. The conclusion undercut the entire original theory. She had not simply collapsed on a trail and been taken apart by wildlife over 12 months. Someone had stored her remains in a controlled environment, then disposed of them shortly before the snake found them. The biology of the snake supported that. Based on known digestion rates, Dr. Thorne estimated the remains had been inside the animal for days, not months. The timeline narrowed. There was now a missing year in Lauren's story, and no sign at all of Evan in the material recovered from the snake. The first people to speak publicly about what happened at the check station were the two men who brought the snake in. Wyatt Keller and Grant Moody were experienced hunters who had taken part in the state's python removal program for years. In interviews with detectives, they both said June 2, 2017, started like any other hunt. They were working a canal off a locked service road west of the visitor area, following tracks in the mud. Around mid-morning, they spotted the snake along the bank, its body swollen in one section. Grant later told investigators he assumed it had swallowed a deer. At the station, they watched as staff prepared for the necropsy. Wyatt described a shift in the room when the cut was made and the contents were exposed. There was a smell everyone expected, but a shape no one did. No one screamed or panicked. According to their statements, one of the officers simply said, "That's human," and then ordered everyone to step back. Wildlife Officer Daniel Price, the supervisor on duty, documented his actions down to the minute. He sealed the area, notified his chain of command, and requested the sheriff's office. He also took care to photograph the snake's exterior. Later, detectives noticed a thin smear of what looked like dried mud along one section of the body. It matched the gray sand used on a specific segment of the nearby service road. That detail helped lock in the capture location when they reconstructed the timeline. While those steps were happening in Collier County, deputies were on their way to Marion's small apartment in Fort Myers. They did not mention the snake. They told her that remains believed to be Lauren's had been found and that DNA would be used to confirm identity. Marion later recounted that she asked about Evan first. The deputies had no answer. There was no evidence of him at the scene, no second set of remains, no extra clothing. Back at the sheriff's office, the discovery set off a review of the original search. Detectives pulled old maps, radio logs, and briefings from June 2016. One short entry in a handwritten log, tied to a supposed pesticide spill, began to draw more attention than it ever had before. In early 2018, almost 2 years after the disappearance and months after the python discovery, the case file landed on a new desk. Detective Elena Rios had recently transferred into the Collier County Sheriff's Cold Case Unit. Her assignment was to review unsolved violent cases and decide which ones still had investigative potential. The Lauren and Evan Fisher file stood out immediately. It contained a full-scale search, national media coverage, and now a body recovered from an invasive predator. Rios started where most people stop, with the paperwork. She read the initial incident reports, the daily search summaries, and the maps drawn during the 2016 operation. One note kept showing up: a hand-drawn box across a service road and canal west of the visitor center. Next to it, in block letters, were the words "chemical exposure zone" and "no ground entry." The notation was attributed to Detective Jason Mallory. According to the 2016 log, the closure was based on a pesticide overspray from a private agricultural contractor. The company name was written in the margin. Rios had worked environmental cases before. She knew that leaks of restricted-use chemicals generate records, sometimes for years. On March 6, 2018, she emailed the regional office of the Environmental Protection Agency and the Florida Department of Agriculture, asking for any documentation of a spill in that area during June 2016. The replies came back with the same answer. There were no reports of pesticide incidents in or around Big Cypress on those dates. No emergency calls, no cleanup logs, no enforcement actions. Rios then searched state business records for the contractor named in the original log. The entity did not exist in Florida's corporate database. There was no registration under that name, no license, no address. At that point, the conflict was obvious. Either multiple agencies had failed to record a serious chemical event, or the original story was fabricated. Rios documented her findings and brought them to her supervisor. Internal Affairs was notified. Quietly, They began reviewing Mallory's role in other investigations and asked for access to archived digital communications from the 2016 search. A week later, building security cameras recorded Mallory entering the server room after hours and attempting to remove a specific rack of drives. He was stopped and detained before he could leave the basement with the hardware. Internal Affairs started with the obvious question. If the pesticide story was false and the server room visit was real, what had Jason Mallory gained from steering the original search away from that service road? They ordered a full financial audit. Analysts pulled his bank records, credit card statements, property holdings, and tax filings for the years around 2016. On paper, his salary as a sheriff's detective was modest but steady. There were no declared side businesses, no major inheritances, no lottery wins. Yet starting 3 days after Lauren and Evan disappeared, deposits of cash began to appear in his accounts. They were structured just under federal reporting thresholds and spread across multiple banks. Over 2 years, the total came to a little over $160,000. Tracing cash is difficult, but some of the money did not stay as cash. Mallory used part of it to pay down a home equity line faster than scheduled. Another portion went to a boat purchase made through a small marina in Lee County. Investigators subpoenaed the marina's accounts. That led them to a shell company that had wired in the exact amount of the boat payment. The shell company was called Cypress Ridge Holdings LLC and was registered in Delaware. Behind Cypress Ridge, they finally found a name. The beneficial owner was a real estate developer named Charles "Chuck" Ridley. He controlled large tracts of land along the western edge of Big Cypress and operated a private hunting lodge there. Ridley was known locally for his influence in county politics and his financial support for law enforcement charities. On paper, there was no obvious point of contact between him and Lauren Fisher. While Florida authorities were piecing that together, a separate investigation was unfolding overseas. In 2019, European police and Interpol targeted a group suspected of trafficking young adults for illegal labor contracts and identity fraud. During a raid in western Ukraine, they seized servers containing client records and transport logs. Inside that data, analysts found a case file for a 19-year-old American male moved from Florida in late June 2016 under a falsified student program. Payment records linked that transferred to an offshore account also funded by Cypress Ridge Holdings. For the first time, investigators had a plausible explanation for why Evan was still missing when his mother's remains surfaced. By mid-2019, the case against Jason Mallory was no longer just an internal affairs problem. Investigators had the fake pesticide report, the attempted server removal, and a trail of unexplained cash that led through Cypress Ridge Holdings to developer Charles "Chuck" Ridley. They also had the Interpol file showing money from that same shell company funding the transport of a 19-year-old American out of Florida weeks after Lauren and Evan vanished. The missing name was not printed in the foreign records, but the age, origin, and timing matched Evan Fisher too closely to ignore. Prosecutors decided to move first on the weakest link. Mallory was arrested on state charges of tampering with evidence, official misconduct, and accepting unlawful compensation. In an interview room at the Collier County Sheriff's Office, investigators laid out the timeline in front of him. They showed him his bank activity alongside Ridley's shell company transfers. They played the video of him in the server room. They put the Interpol report on the table and explained the potential federal exposure if he was tied to human trafficking. On the record, they offered a path to cooperation. At first, Mallory denied everything, claiming coincidence and misunderstanding. When confronted with internal emails recovered from the archived drives he had tried to remove, his position collapsed. Those messages showed him coordinating the chemical spill story with an outside contact tied to Ridley's companies. Facing the likelihood of a long sentence and knowing his actions had already been documented, Mallory agreed to a proffer session. He admitted that Ridley had approached him through an intermediary shortly after the disappearance, offering large payments if the search was kept away from a specific service road bordering Ridley's hunting property. Mallory claimed he was never told exactly what had happened on that road, only that Ridley's adult son had been involved in a serious incident with a hiker's vehicle. He described cash deliveries, coded text messages, and one in-person meeting at a private lodge where Ridley promised further payments if the park stayed quiet. His cooperation gave investigators enough detail to seek search warrants for Ridley's home, lodge, vehicles, and electronic devices, as well as orders freezing Cypress Ridge accounts. As plans were drawn up for a coordinated raid, one unresolved question sat at the center of every briefing. What, if anything, tied Ridley's land directly to the missing year in Lauren's timeline? The operation at Ridley's property took place before dawn on September 10, 2019. Deputies, state agents, and federal officers executed simultaneous warrants at his waterfront home in Naples and his private hunting lodge on the edge of Big Cypress. At the lodge, investigators focused on outbuildings and utility areas. In the basement of a steel-sided storage structure near the skinning shed, they found a reinforced interior room sealed behind a false wall. Inside was a commercial-grade walk-in freezer, running at well below zero. The shelves were empty, the floor scrubbed, but drains and door gaskets were intact. Crime scene technicians treated the freezer as a primary scene. They sprayed a chemical that reacts with trace blood. The seams of the floor, the drain channel, and the rubber seals glowed. Swabs were taken and rushed to the lab. They also collected tool marks from a heavy meat saw stored nearby, along with a stained pair of insulated gloves that had been poorly cleaned. At Ridley's main house, digital forensics teams imaged computers and seized several phones. In a locked office filing cabinet, they found paperwork connecting Cypress Ridge holdings to the same offshore accounts flagged in the Interpol investigation. Within days, the lab confirmed what detectives expected. DNA recovered from the freezer drains and seals matched Lauren Fisher. Microscopic metal transfer on some bone fragments from the python case matched the composition of blades in the lodge saw. When confronted with those results, Ridley was arrested on charges including murder, conspiracy, and trafficking. His son, 23-year-old Tyler Ridley, was taken into custody on related counts. Pretrial hearings in Collier County drew heavy coverage. Prosecutors argued that Tyler struck Lauren with a truck on the service road while driving recklessly and possibly impaired, then called his father instead of 911. They alleged that Charles Ridley ordered Lauren moved to the lodge, kept her remains in the freezer for months, paid Mallory to divert the search, and arranged through criminal contacts to have Evan removed from the country as a way to eliminate a witness and potential claimant. Defense attorneys challenged the timeline and attacked Mallory's credibility, calling him a corrupt cop trying to save himself. Facing a possible life sentence and watching his father's empire unravel, Tyler eventually agreed to speak directly to investigators in exchange for consideration, and what he described about the moments after the collision changed how everyone viewed the case. Tyler Ridley's statement filled in the blank space everyone had been circling. He said that on June 11, 2016, he was driving a pickup on the service road after drinking at the lodge. He rounded a curve too fast and saw two people on foot. He hit the brakes but felt a hard impact. When he got out, Lauren was on the ground, unconscious and bleeding. Evan was on his feet, yelling, trying to call 911 on his phone. Instead of helping, Tyler called his father. According to Tyler, Charles Ridley arrived within minutes in another truck. He told Evan to hang up, took his phone, and told him they would handle it privately. Tyler said his father checked Lauren, decided she was not going to make it, and ordered both of them into the vehicle. Evan refused and tried to walk toward the main road. Within days, Evan was gone from Florida on a bogus overseas work program arranged through Ridley's criminal contacts. Lauren was taken to the lodge freezer. Faced with the physical evidence and his son's testimony, Ridley went to trial in 2021. Prosecutors charged him with second-degree murder, kidnapping, human trafficking, and conspiracy. The defense argued there was no intent to kill and claimed Lauren might have died before reaching the lodge. The forensic freezing evidence and the freezer DNA undercut that theory. A Collier County jury convicted him on the major counts. He received a life sentence plus additional years on the trafficking charges. Tyler, who pleaded guilty to a reduced count of manslaughter and conspiracy, was sentenced to 30 years. Mallory was tried separately. He received a lengthy term for corruption and obstruction, with federal time added for his role in the trafficking scheme. In 2020, using the Interpol files and Ridley's financial records, authorities located Evan in a small city in Eastern Europe, living under a manufactured identity. He was removed from that situation and returned to the United States. Public records show he has chosen to live quietly, away from cameras and away from the Everglades. In the years since, the case has been cited in training programs on missing persons, corruption, and trafficking. Policy changes followed, but one question still divides people who study the file closely. Without the python, would anyone have ever known what really happened on that service road?